This is the week of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit, and President Joe Biden is hosting 49 leaders and leaders of the African Union across the African continent in Washington, D.C. to December 15, 2022. The USA, or United States of America, at this year's summit has invited 49 African leaders, and of course the summit seeks to demonstrate the U.S. undying commitment to the African continent and of course underscore the importance of U.S.-Africa relations and discuss ways of strengthening its ties. With a group of leaders, the summit aims to deepen and expand the long-term U.S.-Africa partnership to advance shared priorities, especially as Washington is seeking to amplify its ties with the African continent. According to the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, the U.S. is bringing resources to the table during the summit to show its commitment to invest on Africa. Amidst these eras defining challenges, the U.S. through its government, private sector and civil society intends to uplift and empower African institutions, citizens and nations. Reasons why the U.S. of course has decided to invest $55 billion on the African continent within a period of 3 years, and will announce its support for the African Union to join the group of G5 20 major economies. What stakes are of course involved when it comes to U.S. decisions to deepen the ties with Africa? Stay tuned and find out in today's edition. Hello ladies and gentlemen, thank you immensely for joining us over your Pan-African channel for your media Africa. I am NJIX NABESEH for presentation, and this is Talking Point. But today we are picking interest in the U.S. Africa Summit, where of course President Joe Biden is hosting 49 African leaders and of course the leaders of the African Union in Washington, D.C. As worth noting that this summit is the first since 2014, of course in 8 years, first hosted by former U.S. President Barack Obama. And as guest this afternoon, I have SHITTU, who is the Digital News Desk editor for News Central. He's joining us all the way from Lagos, Nigeria. Good day to you, sir.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
It's a pleasure having you on today's edition. We shall equally be joined by Mr. NJINE ELVIS, who is the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Actions Party. He shall be joining us all the way from Cameroon's political capital, Yaoundé. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to proceed today's discussion or topic of discussion, the first question I'd like to channel to you, Mr. SHITTU, this afternoon is: what is your analysis of this summit that is taking place in Washington, given it is the first in 8 years?
Essentially, the U.S. Africa Summit is going to be a broader multi-solution approach to the problems that Africa is contending with. Again, the world is a global community, and institutions, governments will continue to collaborate because the new form of competition is collaboration. So governments will continue to collaborate, and Africa as an entity meeting the leaders of the world and of course the President of the United States and other agencies of government will be able to unpack some of the issues that have continued to resist solution. And what that infers is that there's a chance to itemize, and deliberate to get to a logical conclusion as to how to go about resolving the issues that affects Africa. That's on one hand. On the other hand, considering the fact that Africa has the youngest population, it has a lot of youngsters who are scholars, who are tech savvy, who are in the quest for knowledge, as the case may be. It is a good opportunity for the leaders of Africa to negotiate, to deliberate on multilateral approaches to sharing the strengths of both continents. So for me, it's a win-win thing when you have governments deliberating on issues like this, summits where actionable plans are put on the table to ensure that there's betterment for both Africa and the United States.
Okay, now in your opinion, what do you think the United States of America intends to achieve from this summit, given they are bringing together leaders from the African continent and members of the African Union? And of course, these leaders are coming with their different expectations with regard to what they expect from the United States.
For the United States, its mission and hope is clear. The United States will seek to expand its reach and its diversify on its collaborative effort towards ensuring better rule of government and rule of governance and better government. It will try to ensure that its economic policies align with that of African nations. It will try to engage African nations in ways that will increase its political alignment with Africa, considering the relationship that Africa is beginning to have, or that Africa has continued to improve on as regards the Eastern power. States would seek to issues, and we do not expect that the one bullet solution to Africa is probably solved by the United States. So what we have is the United States making overtures to ensure that it's able to have an understanding with African countries such that it will maintain its role, as a major player in, enduring democracy, good governance, and peace, as it promises.
So you have cited good governance, peace, which are some very key elements when it regards to the African continent, especially at a time when some African countries are facing a lot of challenges. Now leaders are expected to discuss coronavirus, which is a health challenge in Africa, trade ties, climate change, food crisis, and of course Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, as I earlier mentioned, all African leaders are coming with their different expectations. For instance, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why not Cameroon? We have President Paul Biya and, of course, Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari, who are both assisting at this summit. Now, given all these topics that have been highlighted, do you think that these topics will actually pull through with what African leaders are expecting from the United States?
So, well, it depends on the level of trade horsing and engagement. Most of the issues that have been highlighted are issues that are already known before now. And I am of the understanding that African leaders will be able to extract not just commitment, but be able to set timelines, actionable, timelines where some of the plans to improve, the continental security, to improve the effect of climate change and all of that, will be put against time such that it becomes measurable. Because merely investing millions or billions, in any sector without actionable plan to measure it will be an exercise in futility. And so, while the United States has tabled its interests and intentions, I'm of the opinion that African heads of state or heads of government will get a good deal from the engagement celebrations. However, regardless of what is on paper, regardless of what is agreed on, it is the political will to drive ideas that ensures that those ideas that have been agreed on are being translated into something that can be seen on ground. So it is not the first time. There will be more deliberations in the future, but at the moment, what we should be asking of is why or how these deliberations will be something we can measure over time. Again, it is not as if these sums will fix our problem overnight. It will take 3 years to see that these sums that have been, offered to Africa are being used or utilized properly. Again, what is the need for the United States? The United States will continue to invest in missions like this to ensure that it has a leverage for global competitive advantage over other global players.
Okay. So it's what it reiterates that this summit comes at a time when Russia and China gain significant grounds on the African continent. Now, could this summit be, or its agenda be for President Joe Biden to switch the tone? Because it's been 8 years since a summit of such magnitude was organized with regards to U.S. and African leaders. Now, could President Joe Biden be seeking to switch that tone when it comes to interacting with African leaders?
Yes, there's a chance that there will be adjustment in foreign policies to be able to respond to African issues or the concerns of African leaders in such ways that will be a win-win for both Africa and the United States. With the incursion of the continued interest and collaboration with Russia and China, it is not a problem if more courtiers or if more nations court Africa. What is most important is what does Africa stand to gain or stand to lose in the course of this bilateral, multilateral, diplomatic agreement. So for me, it's fine. In the context to make Africa better, we should get better. We should have better options and more improvement in investments from across the continent.
Now, you've cited that it's all about what Africa stands to gain or what it stands to lose in this multilateral, bilateral cooperation between U.S. and Africa. Now, in your opinion, what do you think Africa stands to gain, and definitely what they might stand to lose in such cooperations?
Okay, so at the moment, what Africa is battling on many grounds, apart from the effects of climate change, conflicts that have been long drawn, civil wars, the unstable situation in Ethiopia, for example, that is beginning to see some calm. You would realize that Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, is also in that summit, and he may want to restate his commitment or his country's commitment towards peace in the Tigray region. That commitment could help Ethiopia get some passes, because while the war raged on, there were some sanctions, some suspension of certain trade agreements and certain collaborations that existed between Ethiopia and some other nations, Western nations. And so, beyond being in attendance in that meeting, you will realize that the Oromia region in Ethiopia is beginning to have an escalation of crisis. So it is an opportunity to say, yes, this is how far we've gone, but again, these are the other challenges we have. I'm always for African solutions to African problems, but nothing stops you from getting solutions elsewhere. If what you have that is homegrown doesn't work for you. So it is an opportunity to say that some of the problems bedeviling the continent will find solution from deliberating, with the United States. Again, I would have loved to have African leaders deliberate with themselves, often, before deliberating with, Western nations, because our peculiarities are such that we may be able to understand our challenges better. For instance, you see the DRC, it's a conflated quagmire. You will realize that the non-actors, are many. The number of rebel groups are many. You have the complicity or the alleged complicity of Rwanda in the crisis. You have regional forces needing to deploy forces, needing to spend, fund, the peace building initiative. You also have the foreign intervention from peace interventions from the AU and all of that. So these things are expensive. They will continue to impact on the countries and the region. And unless there is peace in all of these regions, you cannot have investment, you cannot have growth, you cannot have tourism potential being maximally utilized. So, it's a good thing. And more so, beyond the current agreement, we did hear that Eritrea and Ethiopia now have a visa-free arrangement where citizens can visit themselves without having to apply for visas. I think that these are some of the positives in African leaders deliberating and discussing on ways to booster trade, social and political ties.
Definitely, African solutions would definitely be the best option to African problems. Now, since President Joe Biden got to the presidency or to the helm of the United States, he has never stepped foot on the African continent. But nonetheless, we've had representatives coming in to deliberate with African leaders. Now, Russia, as we earlier mentioned, and China are gaining grounds. They're expanding their influence on the African continent. Could this be, or could we say that the United States of America is now actually trying to compete with these other foreign powers?
So for me, it is fine. Competition is fine. It's one side. What we see as competition may actually be more of collaboration, which is what leads the world at the moment. The best forms of competition will be collaboration. How do we draw strength from ourselves? How do we collaborate to get the best of a situation? The president of Niger Republic did mention when he went to Italy not long ago that we could have exchange of professionals, between both countries, as against migrants being, trying to force themselves out of the continent, meeting, their debts, on high sea, or getting into Europe and being unable to find jobs. So if we understand that, yes, there are a lot of migrants from Africa seeking jobs in Europe, we could also say, what jobs do you need the most manpower, the most expertise, the most labor, the most migrants, So when we have that, we can have people focus on reaching the demands or the needs of foreign countries. So it becomes a collaborative effort where we are producing or we are exporting the minds and brains and the strengths that these countries across the world are actually interested in. So it's a win-win for us to have Nigerians, Nigerians, Cameroonians, Kenyans who are professionals in their fields, who are experts in their fields, who will add value to the countries they are actually going to, and by adding value to such countries, they are actually also gaining relevant knowledge to improve on foreign exchange and earnings to their home countries, and they may actually also train those at home when they have an opportunity to invite them over or to come back to Africa itself. So it's a win-win regardless of how we, we look at it. If we are exporting experts, if we're exporting smart people who have, what Europe needs, for example, we should be asking us also, are we getting machineries in exchange? Are we getting power supply, power generating sets into the continent? Are we having knowledge sharing and experts coming to the continent to come and improve on any sector of the economy, as the case may be? So these are areas that we can actually look into to ensure that we're able to collaborate more, regardless of how many people are coming to Africa. It would be a nice thing to have the whole world coming to Africa. It will mean that more countries of the world now growth and development in Africa. You do not put your money where you do not believe in. And so if the United States, after seeing what Germany is also doing, the United States,
Shittu, are you with us? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa, and today we are discussing the US-Africa Summit, where of course we are asking questions on what stakes are involved now that the United States of America says that it intends to solidify ties with the African continent. And of course, it's worth noting that this year's summit is the first since it was first held in 2014 by the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. And of course, President Joe Biden has invited 49 African leaders and of course leaders of the African Union to this year's summit in Washington, D.C. We are having indications that Shittu is back with us. Greetings once more. Right on.
Okay, so we did have the Secretary of State on the continent reaching out to countries and discussing issues around, cooperation and all that. So it is in order to have more of that. It doesn't matter if Joe Biden comes to Africa or not. He was present, at the COP27, which is something that is very pertinent to the United States and the entire, world. Be that as it may, what we prefer is to see continuous collaboration. Let's continue to see alignment of resources. Let's continue to see, exchange in expertise, and best practices. Let's have workshops and seminars and trainings that are collaborative, such that African countries can begin to share some of the best practices, on the continent with the world. So for me, it's totally in order to have more investors on the continent. The more we have, the merrier. If we have Russia coming in, if we have Turkey coming in, if we have Germany coming in, on the continent, it's all a win-win for us, because nobody invests in a place that is not viable. Nobody invests money where, it does not seem that there's going to be growth or hope or development. So for me, it is totally in order to have, all of these investments come at this time. Don't forget also that elections are coming for many countries. That transition sometimes needs technology, in terms of, and a lot of that, enumeration, and for those who will need to capture their data, you will need collaboration to ensure what you're deploying is effective and free from being hacked or misapplied.
Now, Shittu, you've evoked the issue of investment on the African continent. US says they intend to invest in African institutions, in citizens and nations. Now today, African leaders and leaders of key civil society from the African continent will be discussing to see how they can better the African continent, they can better grow the African continent. How can these leaders bring to the table, given the United States is a guru at its level, how can they bring to the table matters that really affect the continent, so when they're coming back, they come back with resources that will not just be used on the pen or say on the paper, but will be used to better the African continent, say at the technological level?
So we are happy to see that African heads of state are interacting and deliberating on issues around technology, issues around solution to stem poverty, issue around climate change, financing, issue around tech adaptation, and adoption, on the continent. Most of these issues are known before now. What we have always had problems with is implementation. And the issue about implementation comes from the fact that democratic practices are needed to be enshrined in the system, so that people do not become the state and the state become the president, where presidents stay too long, such that they become less effective, they become underwhelming, they become underperforming, because the ideas they have are now stale. They are not measured on the scale of reality, and then most times they are unable to follow up on the deliberations they've had. So we need implementation when these, the fine points of this summit have been reached. We need adaptation. We need them to do more in ensuring that whatever has been agreed on is done. It is not just a jamboree or a meeting of just banter. Probably be entertained and entertained, and then return home. So we expect for there are countries where there are issues that need deliberations, and not until these deliberations are highlighted, not until the world leaders are able to share the problems may continue to elude the citizens. You have countries like Equatorial Guinea where there is poor distribution of wealth. You have, Uganda, which has one of the longest serving presidents, and there are lots of complaints about, effective distribution of wealth, as I mentioned earlier, and governance, the issue of governance, suppression of popular will of people, poor engagement of civil society, suppression of journalists, and alternative views. And so unless you allow some of these, in the system, you cannot effectively govern countries, on the African continent.
Now, the U.S. President Joe Biden, intends to back a permanent spot for the African Union at the G20 major economies. More to that, President Joe Biden is reportedly expected to open the backing of a permanent seat for Africa at the United Nations Security Council. Now, what could be the motive of this move by the U.S. President?
The move may be necessitated by the continuous complaints of many political players and analysts who think or assume, correctly or incorrectly, that Africa will be better represented, in the Committee of Nations when they're involved in in the G20, say in the UN Security Council. But merely having a representation is not enough when the issues you're contending with, you have not deployed enough to stem those issues within your reach, within your powers. It is not how much meetings you hold or what names you call those meetings that will make peace to come about. What will make peace to come about will be essentially when people agree to stop being violent, who agree to run a nation as a nation should be run. These are some of the areas that I feel that while we may not complain, we should know better that the solution to our problems does not necessarily have to be based on deliberations with world leaders.
Now, in order to proceed, I'd like to pinpoint on one point. Now, This summit, as I earlier mentioned, is the second since 2014. It was first hosted by former President Barack Obama, as I earlier said. Now, is this not a dangerous period, a dangerously long time for the U.S. to have taken its eyes off the African continent, given that within this 8 years, this long period of 8 years, we had other powers that were stepping in to fill in the gap on the African continent?
There's a chance the United States feels that it has Africa under its finger, that it has most of its mission and dreams and hopes, for Africa already sorted out. And at the time when it went back to to the back burner, others thought this was an opportunity to offer better solutions or alternative solutions to Africa, and then they came in. And in coming in, they were able to broker some of the right deals and ensure that they are able to meet Africa halfway. So for me, it is it's a two-way thing. The more it is we do as African leaders, the better it is for us. What we should not overlook is the fact that there's yet unexplored opportunities for African leaders.
Now you've cited a point that the U.S. feels that they have Africa under their finger. Now I wish to find out, do you think there is still this need, or many countries still feel they have to choose from the United States and other Western powers?
So it is not a function of choice. It's a function of what the global space has become. You do not lose anything by allowing countries with their different areas of specialty to invest in the sectors that they are interested in. Because while, for instance, our national policy may say that we need certain things, we need to pursue certain dreams, for some other countries, they've gone way past that. Some countries have lived way more than 100 years. And so it will be a struggle for you to continue to have nations in Africa choosing between, the countries on the continent, outside the continent. In choosing, it has to be, what are my energy needs? What are my, infrastructural needs? What are my social-cultural or enterprise needs? What are my needs in the area of tourism, investment? All of these will now be what African leaders approach foreign, countries with. And then if you're able to tick a box or two or three or out of the 10, it works.
Now you've earlier on you mentioned the issue of migration. Now U.S. is termed where the land of greener pastures, where African citizens are constantly dying on the Mediterranean when trying to cross over to the U.S. of A. Now what measures can be put in place at the African level before at the level of the United States in order to ensure that such situations are being remedied?
So, in the words of Watan Shiri, an Ethiopian poet, you do not leave home unless, I'm not quoting directly now, there has to be a problem for which you are leaving home. Nobody wants to leave his home, the comfort of his home, to elsewhere. When it gets to the point where people have to leave their homes, it means something is wrong at home.
Then how can they rectify that problem? Because it feels like a problem comes from the African continent, because constantly we have African youths, most especially that are living in Africa.
Absolutely. And so it is because the African leaders are not listening to the youths, hungry for. What are they? What are the African, the young minds on the continent? What are
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Talking Points over your Pan-African channel. If you're listening, you're right on Shittu.
of opportunity, skills, and solutions that need adapting. But when these creatives do not get, the support of government, the support of,
Okay, we are in contact with SHITTU FOWORA, who is a digital news editor. He's joining us all the way from Lagos, Nigeria, and of course is updating us on today's topic of discussion, which is the US-Africa Summit, of course ongoing in Washington, D.C., a 3-day conference that comes together or brings together 49 heads of state and government from the African continent, as well as members of the African Union, to discuss on measures on how they can better the African continent. And of course, this is Talking Point, ladies and gentlemen, where we're discussing today, as we earlier mentioned, that first ever of this summit was first organized in 2014 by U.S. former President Barack Obama, where he sought to bring together leaders from the African continent to mend together the ties and solidify the relationship that exists between the United States of America and the African continent. And this time around, 2022, 49 leaders are there in Washington, D.C. to discuss on measures on coronavirus, trade ties, the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, climate change, food crisis, amongst other issues that affect Africa and the United States, and of course see how they can bring about solution. Just to reiterate that U.S. President Joe Biden under the United States of America has set or pledged to invest $55 billion to the African continent during a period of 3 years, and of course is expected to back the African Union's decision or support at the G5 major economies, as well as reportedly back the African Union or Africa's support at the United Nations Security Council, which is what African leaders and of course the head of the African Union had earlier cited, that Africa needs a support at the United Nations Security Council, given the challenges at the level of security which the African continent is facing at the moment. And of course, if you're watching us over 4U Television Africa, you're watching us or listening over 4U Radio here in Cameroon, FM 96.3. Today, we are discussing US-Africa Summit 2022 over Talking Points Pan-African program over your Pan-African channel on 4U Media Africa. Of course, I'm NJIX NABESEH for presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, as I earlier mentioned, we shall equally be getting Mr. NJINE ELVIS BANEH, but due to issues within our control, we shall not be having him today. But yet, we are still with SHITTU FOWORA, who is joining us all the way from Nigeria. Once again, greetings, SHITTU. Hello, SHITTU. Okay, due to connections issues, we shall not be having SHITTU FOWORA. Again, we're hoping he shall join us. As I mentioned, he's joining us all the way from Nigeria. Now, this US-Africa Summit comes at a time when we have powerful powers like Russia, China, Belgium, and other African or Western powers, of course, that are expanding their influence on the African continent. And of course, African leaders might be tempted, according to analysts, to choose a side which to prefer. But that then African leaders are in Washington to discuss how they can better the African continent. We have the Democratic Republic of Congo that is facing challenges in its east. We have Cameroon's president that is at the summit, as Cameroon is facing issues and its two English-speaking regions. We equally have the Nigerian president Muhammadu Buhari, who is at this US-Africa summit. And of course, it's worth noting that the West African country is preparing for elections come 2023, and of course is facing insecurity in its northeast region, and of course the northern part of the African most populous country. We equally have other countries like Ethiopia, we have Sudan, we have South Africa, we have Kenya, we have other countries that are facing challenges as we speak. But then with all these, with this 3-day summit seek to bring about what the African leaders are actually seeking for, that is what we're trying to answer in today's edition. We're getting indications that SHITTU FOWORA is back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now that Africa's are facing challenges, SHITTU, what do you think African leaders together away from the summit can sit back and bring to the table in order to quell the tensions that are affecting respective African nations?
Fine. So if African leaders are able to meet and deliberate on issues around Africa in the United States, what it means to me is that there is need for more deliberations, there is need for more talk and more action. And because it's a lot easier to do business, say with the United States and Kenya, than Kenya doing business with Djibouti, which is its neighbor, not because of proximity, but because of infrastructure that is, poor. And so importing from, say, China to Uganda is a lot easier, considering the infrastructure, than moving goods from Uganda to Mozambique. So some of these issues are not just about talk; it's about implementation. Let it be that when African leaders return, they should understand that those things that were achievable in 3 days of deliberation are also achievable, a lot more when some of the issues are being addressed on the continent, when some of the continent-bred ideas are being forced of every nation. We do not discard the ideas of our creative industry, because that is the next direction. There is a lot in this industry. Always look at this and doing more, deliberating more, areas that have remained a bit in terms of countries that there is military incursion.
Okay, SHITTU, are you still with us?
Undermining, issues can be addressed in ways that will mean that we are doing better ourselves.
Okay, SHITTU, in order to conclude, I'd like to ask you this question.
Yes,
what
sure.
do you think, permit me ask you this last question, due to connection issues, we are finding it difficult to connect with you, but then I'll still try this last question. What is the way forward for Africa to be the united and prosperous continent that all the Pan-Africanists and the youth of today are wishing for?
Africa should concentrate on exploring areas of shared interest, of shared values, areas of exchange where will be reduced between African countries. We already have a lot of instruments, from MESA, the AU. There are lots of heads of government that I
Okay, due to connection disturbances, we are finding it difficult to connect with you, SHITTU FOWORA, but it's been a pleasure having you on today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. We're broadcasting live from Cameroon. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's edition of Talking Points over your Pan-African channel. I have been NJIX NABESEH for presentation over this today's program, and of course, programs continue over for you Media Africa. In the meantime, do have a great day.